Ever get that feeling like something's off in your relationship?
Oh, yeah, like a sixth sense.
Yeah, things just don't add up, and it leaves you with this unsettling feeling.
You start to question everything.
Exactly. Well, in today's deep dive, we're looking into a story where those suspicions turned out to be true.
Oh, this sounds juicy.
It is. We're going deep into the Murder in Magnolia podcast.
Okay, a true crime thriller. Those always keep you on the edge of your seat.
This one definitely will. It makes you wonder about love and betrayal and just how far some people go.
Especially at our age, you know. Relationships change, some fall apart.
Yeah, and starting over can be a really scary thought.
The case takes those fears to a whole new level.
Seriously, imagine your spouse wants a divorce, maybe a fresh start.
Midlife crisis, maybe.
Right. But then you uncover a plot to have you killed.
Whoa, hold on. Are you serious?
That's exactly what happened to Nancy Latham.
That's terrifying. So, who is behind it? Her spouse.
It was a whole scheme orchestrated by her husband, Chris Latham.
What? No way. And he was working with.
His girlfriend, Wendy Moore.
Okay, so we've got a disgruntled husband, a love affair, and a murder plot. It's like something out of a movie.
It's stranger than fiction, that's for sure. But the question is, why?
Yeah, what was the motive? Was it just a love triangle gone bad?
The podcast dives into that, and it's pretty complicated. On the surface, it seems like Chris wanted out of the marriage.
A clean break. But divorce can get messy.
And expensive. Don't forget, Chris was a banker.
So maybe a sprinkle of greed mixed with all that passion?
That's one theory. And it gets even creepier. The podcast talks about this hit packet on Chris's computer.
A hit packet? What's that?
It had maps to Nancy's house, photos of her.
Oh my gosh, that is chilling.
It's like something straight out of a crime thriller.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just a fleeting thought.
No, this was planned out. Someone really wanted her gone.
And the people involved just add to the intrigue. The hitman, Sam Yenawine.
Wait, there was an actual hitman.
You're not going to believe this.
Oh, yeah.
He was Wendy's ex-husband.
Seriously. That is wild.
Talk about a tangled web. And then there's Aaron Wilkinson, the accomplice. You actually confessed to the police, which blew the whole thing open.
Wow, so he turned against them. What was his deal?
What's interesting is that he comes across as somewhat relatable in the podcast.
Really? For someone involved in a murder plot.
You get this sense of vulnerability from him, almost like he was in over his head.
Maybe he was pressured or manipulated into it. Did he testify against Chris and Wendy?
He did, and his testimony became a key part of the case, especially since Chris was trying to downplay his own involvement.
Oh, so he was playing the innocent card.
Basically, claiming he just wanted a divorce and had no idea about any murder plot.
But come on, he was paying legal fees for people accused of trying to kill his wife.
Exactly. It doesn't really scream innocent, does it?
Not at all. The podcast really highlights those inconsistencies, making you question Chris's whole story.
So was he the mastermind, a pawn, or something in between? The trial itself is where things get really intense.
I bet. Was it a media frenzy?
The podcast describes how the jury struggled to come to a decision, especially about Chris's role.
That's gotta be a tough job, being a juror on a case like that.
You're weighing evidence, listening to conflicting stories, and ultimately deciding someone's fate.
The podcast actually includes interviews with some of the jurors.
Really? That's amazing. What did they say?
Their accounts are fascinating. You hear them grappling with the evidence, trying to make sense of it all. Some were totally convinced Chris was guilty based on what they saw.
And others weren't so sure.
Right. One juror, Christina Weatherby, felt like Chris might have been manipulated by Wendy.
So she wasn't entirely convinced of his guilt.
It's incredible how different people can look at the same information and come to such different conclusions.
It shows you how perception can be so subjective, even in a courtroom.
And it makes you wonder, if you were on that jury, what would your verdict be?
Right. What evidence would sway you one way or the other? But through all of this, Nancy is sitting there in the courtroom, waiting.
I can't even imagine the emotional toll that must have taken on her.
The podcast plays audio from the moment the verdicts are read.
Oh, wow. So you hear her reaction.
You can hear the relief in her voice.
Yeah.
She describes it as finally being able to breathe again.
After all that time, she finally got some sense of justice. But then she does something completely unexpected. She visits Aaron Wilkinson in jail.
Wait, she went to see the man who was supposed to kill her?
She did. It's an incredible act of forgiveness. Nancy saw something in Aaron, a chance for him to change. She even fought for him to get a reduced sentence.
Wow. That's truly remarkable.
It speaks volumes about her character, her strength. So Aaron is in jail, Chris and Wendy are found guilty. What happens next?
That's where things take another turn. The podcast digs into what happened to them after the trial, and it's not what you'd expect.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. It's wild to think that Chris and Wendy went from lovers to, well, enemies.
Their stories really start to clash after the trial. But let's rewind a bit, back to that pivotal jury deliberation. The podcast takes us right inside the jury room.
It's like with flies on the wall listening to their every word. Must have been intense.
Definitely. You can practically feel the tension as they try to reach a verdict. One juror, Bill Hogan, talked about how they approached it systematically.
Makes sense, starting with Chris Latham, right?
Yeah. But they hit a roadblock pretty quickly. Hogan said it felt like they were not together there, like they were speaking different languages.
It's amazing how perceptions can be so different, even with the same evidence. What was clear to one juror was confusing to another.
Absolutely. When it came to Wendy Moore, though, the jury seemed more unified.
Oh, really? Why was that?
The evidence against her was pretty overwhelming. The burner phones, money transfers, incriminating documents printed from her computer.
She left a digital trail a mile wide. Talk about sloppy.
Some jurors even commented on her behavior during the trial. Said she often shielded her face with her hair.
Hiding from their gaze. Do you think she knew the jig was up?
It makes you wonder, maybe she realized how strong the evidence was against her. But with Chris, it was a different story.
The jury wasn't so sure about him.
There was a lot of debate about how involved he really was. Some thought he was the mastermind.
And others saw him as more of a pawn in Wendy's game.
Exactly. That's where Christina Weatherby's perspective is so interesting. She was one of the jurors who questioned Chris's guilt, at least when it came to the conspiracy charge.
Interesting. What was her reasoning?
She suggested that Chris might not have fully understood what Wendy was planning. She pointed out that Wendy had access to all of his passwords.
So she could have used his computer without him knowing.
It's possible. And that hit packet could have been planted.
Like a digital frame-up. Talk about a twist.
Weatherby also challenged the idea that Chris was the sole financial backer. Wendy had her own money. She wasn't dependent on him.
So she had the means and the motive to do it on her own.
Potentially. But let's not forget the prosecution side. They had those photos from the hit packet traced back to Chris's phone, and those recorded jail calls where he was reassuring Wendy.
Supporting her even while she was behind bars. Tough evidence to ignore.
It really was a case of conflicting evidence. The jury had to decide which narrative they believed.
A legal tug of war. What was the final verdict?
They found Chris guilty, but not on all counts. Guilty of aiding and abetting, but not of conspiracy.
A mixed bag for the prosecution.
For Nancy, though, it was a moment of relief. The podcast plays audio of her reaction, and you can hear the weight lift off her shoulders.
Like a huge burden had been lifted.
She said it felt like she could finally breathe again. And then she goes and does something truly remarkable.
Wait, the visit to Aaron Wilkinson in jail?
Yeah. She could have easily thought revenge, but instead she offered forgiveness.
That's incredible. Did she explain why she did it?
She saw potential in Aaron, believed he could change. She even advocated for a lighter sentence.
Wow. What was Aaron's response?
He was completely overwhelmed, humbled by her kindness. You can hear it in his voice. It's a testament to the power of second chances. But while this was happening, Chris and Wendy were starting their sentences.
Facing the consequences. So, soulmate status confirmed or denied?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Their stories start to diverge once they're in prison.
What do you mean, like they changed their stories?
In their appeals and legal filings, they kind of shift the blame onto each other.
Yeah.
Wendy claimed she was just following Chris's lead.
And Chris was saying he was a victim.
Yeah, he tried to paint himself as being manipulated by Wendy, said she was a sociopath.
Wow. So much for soulmates. More like blame mates now.
It makes you wonder what their relationship was really like. Was it ever truly love?
Or just a convenient partnership built on a foundation of deceit. It's hard to say. But their actions speak volumes.
It's a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be tested under extreme pressure. So we've got this tangled web of relationships, conflicting narratives, and the fallout of a shocking crime. But amidst all the chaos, Nancy is trying to rebuild her life.
Picking up the pieces, it's an inspiring part of the story. What happened to her after the trial?
It's amazing how Nancy was able to move forward after everything she went through. What did she do? Where did she even begin to rebuild her life?
Well, first things first, she got out of South Carolina.
Just packed up and left.
Yep. She needed a fresh start, a place where she wouldn't constantly be reminded of the ordeal.
Makes sense. You can't heal in the same environment where the trauma happened.
Exactly. And she found a new job, something fulfilling that gave her a sense of purpose.
Work can be such a lifeline, right? Especially after something like this.
It gives you structure, a routine, and a sense of accomplishment. It's a way to reclaim your life. But Nancy didn't stop there.
The podcast mentioned something about stand-up comedy.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? She channeled her experience into humor, started doing open mic nights, incorporating bits of her story into her act.
Wow, that takes guts. To find humor in something so dark.
It's a way of taking back control, saying, this happened, but it doesn't define me.
And laughter can be so healing.
Yeah.
You should keep up with the comedy.
She did for a while, but eventually the late nights and the grind got to be too much. But it sounds like it was a really positive experience for her.
Like a way to explore a different side of herself.
Exactly. She was rediscovering who she was outside of the trauma, but there's also a shift in how she talked about her experience.
Oh, how so?
At first, it was almost like she felt compelled to tell everyone she met about what happened. But as time went on, she became more selective.
Sharing it on her own terms.
Right, only with people she trusted, when she felt ready.
That's so important. Reclaiming her story, her narrative. It's about setting boundaries.
Exactly, it's a powerful part of healing. So Nancy is rebuilding her life, finding her strength. What about Chris and Wendy? What happened to them?
They both served time. Chris was released in January 2022 after a little over 7 years.
7 years? Does that seem like enough?
It's hard to say. Justice can be a tricky thing. Wendy got out a few months earlier, in October 2021. Her sentence was reduced.
Did their relationship survive prison? Were they still the soulmates they claimed to be?
It's hard to know for sure. The podcast doesn't give a definitive answer, but there are hints that they might have reconciled.
Really? What makes you think that?
Remember those jailhouse phone calls? Chris was so supportive of Wendy, eager for her to get out.
And she was counting down the days.
Yeah. So there's this possibility that their feelings for each other remained, even after everything that happened.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How love and loyalty can persist, even in the face of betrayal and crime. But it also makes you question the nature of their relationship. Was it genuine, or was it something else entirely?
Those are questions we may never have answers to. But one thing's for sure, their actions had a devastating impact on their daughters, Emily and Madison.
The kids are often the forgotten victims in these situations.
Absolutely. The podcast mentioned that Emily wanted nothing to do with her father.
Understandable, given what he did.
Madison, on the other hand, seemed to hold on to a sliver of hope for reconciliation.
Even after calling him a monster.
It seems so. And according to the podcast, she has since reconnected with her father.
Wow. While Emily is still keeping her distance.
It's a reminder that there's no right or wrong way to process trauma. Everyone heals differently.
And forgiveness is a deeply personal choice. What about Aaron Wilkinson? Did he manage to turn his life around after prison?
His path wasn't easy. He struggled with addiction and even got arrested again shortly after Chris was released.
Oh no, what for?
Attempted burglary. But there's a glimmer of hope. He got sober after that arrest.
That's good to hear. Addiction is a tough battle.
He's now working at a drug treatment facility, helping others overcome addiction.
Wow. Talk about turning your life around.
He's sharing his story, offering guidance, and showing that redemption is possible. He's even remarried, has a child, and another one on the way.
That's incredible. Proof that second chances can lead to beautiful things.
This whole story, this deep dive into murder in Magnolia, has been a roller coaster. We've explored betrayal, love, justice, and the power of forgiveness.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it. It makes you think about the choices we make and the consequences that follow.
If you want to hear the full story, all the intricate details and emotional twists and turns, we highly recommend checking out the Murder in Magnolia podcast. It's a captivating listen that will leave you pondering the complexities of human nature. And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. Until next time.